Good evening and welcome to this event in the Swansea Science Festival 2020. It is really good to see so many people here this evening. I understand we have a really international audience, which is great to see. Welcome to the Swansea Science Festival. This is a very unusual year for all sorts of reasons. It is an exciting year from Swansea's point of view because this is our centenary year and we are celebrating 100 years of Swansea University. But also, as we're all aware, the situation we're in leaves us with a virtual science festival and we're all learning new skills in order to engage with that. So it's very good to see you all here this evening. My name's Martin Stringer. I am Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education at Swansea University, and it's a great pleasure to be representing the university here this evening. We also thank our other partners in the festival, the National Waterfront Museum and Swansea University. Please, as we go through this evening, I'm not sure it's going to be a very exciting evening. Anything might happen to some extent. I'm sure it'll be very interesting for all of us. But if you do wish to share, then there is the Q&A element at the bottom of the screen and you can raise your questions. But we would also encourage you to share your experience through social media using hashtag Swansea SciFest. This evening, we are very pleased to be welcoming Mark Playgrove, Professor of Psychology and Director of the Sleep Laboratory at Swansea University, and Julia Lockheart, a fine artist who is a senior lecturer at Swansea College of Art and is lecturer at Goldsmiths, University of London. They've collaborated together since 2016 on public group discussions of dreams, during which the dream is painted by Julia onto pages taken with the publisher's permission from Freud's book, The Interpretation of Dreams. They have, over lockdown, been discussing and painting as online events and the dreams of health and other key workers, and are currently writing for Routledge their book, The Science and Art of Dreaming, which includes their research into the effects of dream sharing on empathy. As I say, I think it's going to be an extremely exciting evening, lots of interesting things to learn, and I'm sure we will all enjoy the event this evening. So I'm very pleased to be able to hand over to Mark Playgrove and look forward to what we have in store. Thank you.
Hello everybody and welcome to this event celebrating 150 years since Dora, now known to be Ida Bauer, shared a dream with Freud shortly after she started her psychoanalysis with him. She very famously left the psychoanalyst 11 weeks later, and we will be discussing that and the dream and her life circumstances during this event. I'll just share my screen. And that's great. So welcome. My name is Professor Mark Playgrove, and as was just said, I work with Julia Lockheart, who's an artist, Dr. Julia Lockheart, who's an artist at Swansea College of Art and is also at Goldsmiths, University of London. We're also joined by Brigitte Holzinger from the Institute for Consciousness and Dream Research in Vienna, Zora Wesley from University of Vienna, Deirdre Barrett from Harvard Medical School. She is also the editor of the American Psychological Association's journal Dreaming, and Professor Danny Nobus, Professor of Psychology and Psychoanalysis at Brunel University and a Fellow of the Freud Museum, London. This is Dora, slightly older than when she was seeing Freud. This is her when she was considerably younger, and the reason this one is quite interesting is because she's with her brother, who is also part of the dream. Just to give the main dates that we're talking about as an introduction, Dora was born in 1882 on the Berggasse, quite by coincidence. That's the street that Freud was also then later practicing in. In 1895, Dora's father, Philippe, and Frau K commenced an affair. In spring 1896, Herr K invited Dora to his office to see a church festival, and he kissed her, attempted to kiss her, did kiss her, which she didn't want, and she escaped. She was 13 at the time. Dora and Philip then go to the K's house near a lake in the Alps. So that's Dora and her father. While they were there, Herr K, on a visit to a lake, propositions Dora with the claim that he was not being intimate anymore with his wife. And after they had a boat trip on the lake, Dora slapped him. For the following 4 nights, she had the burning house dream, which is the same dream that we will hear today. After the 4th night, she left with her father. She had had the dream on each of those nights. Her parents refused to believe what had happened on the lake. They sided with Herr K, who denies it. Then between 1898 and 1900, Dora begged her father to break off the friendship with the K's because she was seeing herself as having been, as she said, handed over to Herr K as the price of his tolerating the relations between her father, Dora's father, and his wife. So that's the difficult circumstances she was in when she went to see Freud at the end of 1900, so 120 years ago. In October 1900, Philip tells Freud that Dora's fantasy, he called it a fantasy of the scene by the lake, is causing her to be depressed, that she is pressing him to break off his relations with the K's, and he asks Freud to bring her to reason. Dora starts to see Freud. In November and December, 6 weeks into the treatment, Dora again has the burning house dream. At the very end of December, Dora has a second dream and then tells Freud that she is going to leave the psychoanalysis. It's her abrupt leaving which has made her quite a hero for many people during the 20th century. What Freud then did was, in 1905, he wrote a book, which is how we know that she left his psychoanalysis, called Fragments of an Analysis of a Case of Hysteria, Dora, which had the draft title Dreams and Hysteria, because Freud in 1900, start of 1900, had published his book, The Interpretation of Dreams. That had mixed reviews. And so this book was really the first one where there is considerable detail about the person and a considerable detail about a dream, so that we can look at the two together. A lot is now known about Dora. This is a book by Hannah Decker in 1991. Freud, Dora and Vienna, 1900. And we now know quite a lot about it. Dora is now known to have been Ida Bauer. Herr and Frau K are now known to be Hans and Pepina Zelenka. And quite a lot of their biography has now been worked out. Dora, as the end of the 1930s occurred, managed to escape to the United States and died there shortly after the Second World War. So what this event does is it concerns Dora's dream. It concerns what's known historically about her life and her free associations to the dream. Now, for the purposes of this, we're setting aside Freud's association to this material and his wider diagnoses, which you will find in the book. Of course, attendees and panelists may raise those matters if they want. But what we're doing is just looking at what she said about the dream, what we know about her historical life and the dream. The event follows what's called the Allman dream appreciation method. And I've chosen this because I've used this a lot in the work that I do with Julia in the online and live dream groups we have. But this method, devised by the psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Montague Allman, emphasizes listening to and asking questions about a dream, listening to and asking questions about the recent life circumstances of the dreamer and mapping them together. So it doesn't really go very far beyond people's recent emotional life and the dream. And he wanted lots of lay people to use this so that lay people in general could appreciate their dreams. And this is very appropriate to this event because what we want to do is to look at what Dora said about the dream, look at Dora's dream, because although Freud's 1905 book has been very controversial, in a way we can get back to Dora by concentrating just on the dream and just on what she says about her life in the book. And it's a way of getting back to those parts, notwithstanding the fact that we can also at other times, or possibly during some of today, talk about what Freud also thought. Just a reminder, question and answer comments, questions and replies can be made by attendees throughout. I'll just go through the timing. We're now in the first section, which is the introduction and welcome. I've just briefly described the Allman Dream Appreciation Method. We're next going to have a film, which we and colleagues in Vienna, we're very grateful to them, made at Sigmund Freud's apartment in the Berggasse of Vienna, which is now the Sigmund Freud Museum. This film was made during the last week. The dream will be read aloud by one of our panel, Dr. Holsinger. In that, she will then read the dream aloud afterwards. After that, although we're mainly interested in just the dream and Dora's account of it and her view of her life and her free associations to the dream, that's Freud's method, is to get her free associations. In the Allman method, we all, in a way, come together as part of this event by briefly just thinking, what would it be like if I had that dream? So there will be a very brief matter of minutes where attendees can do what is often done in an Allman session, where we take the dream from the dreamer and we think about what would it be like if I had that? So please do put down in the Q&A what it would mean to you if you had that dream, and the panelists can say so as well. That's very brief. Once that bit is finished, we do not then say anything more about our own views about the dream. We hand it back, it's Dora's, and we need to look at Dora, Ida Bauer's life and what she said about her life. 7:30, whoops, sorry. 7:30 UK time, the general waking life background for Dora's life is told. Then we have, read by student Zora Wesley in Vienna, Dora's free associations to the dream as recorded in Freud's book. So she has several free associations. The dream is then told again by Dr. Brigitte Holsinger in Vienna. So shortly after 8 o'clock, we should be in the position for attendees, panelists, to be discussing ways in which the dream is related to Dora's waking life. Now, during that, the presentation of the dream, once the dream is said, Julia Lockheart will start painting the dream, as she does in our events, and she'll be painting them onto Freud's book, The Interpretation of Dreams. She finds pages in that book that have a shape that is good for the dream. By chance, there may be some words that Freud said that may be relevant, but Julia's soon going to start looking through the book, finding a page or 2 pages on which to paint, and you will then be able to see her painting the dream. So the book that she's got there is quite thin. If Juliet just holds it up to the camera, it's actually quite a thin version of the book because we've been doing this for 4 years. And it's used up quite a lot of the pages, and we're very grateful to the publisher who's allowed us to use the first English translation for this. At the end, we're going to have half an hour of general discussion about the dream, about Dora, about how Dora's case has been seen throughout the 20th century and part of this century. And at the very end, Julia will by then have finished the painting. All our paintings are done in this time scale. And she'll show the painting, describe it, and attendees and panelists will be able to react to the painting and have a discussion about it. Just a reminder, what we usually do this in live sessions. This is a live session we were honoured to do at Freud's house in London as part of a Festival of Social Science that was being done. I discuss a dream with a live person. Julia paints it live in about an hour. That's us with another audience, with Julia looking at the painting and discussing it. And further ones of our paintings, dreams, publications and articles by us, videos of the paintings can be seen on the dreamsid.com website. And we normally do this so as to socialize the dream, get a lot of people to see it. Obviously, in Dora's case, it's been extremely socialized and talked about, but it's also to produce art from it and to get people talking about the dream. So now, thank you. I'm going to stop speaking there, and we have a film of to show.
Today's session is about Dora's dream, Dora's first dream. And now in the room where probably Dora saw Freud at the time, meaning this is the first practice room probably of Sigmund Freud, because we are now in Berggasse 19, which was Sigmund Freud's apartment and practice, and is now the famous and fabulous Sigmund Freud Museum, Berggasse 19 in the 9th district of Vienna. Newly renovated, and now you can see all the other rooms of Sigmund Freud, all the private rooms as well, and also the first practice room, which is here. What you see here as the couch is of course not the couch. She's first of all not red, and I think not very comfortable either. But she's a work of art. So Dora was born not far from here on November 1st, 1882 in Berggasse 32. The dream. A house was on fire. My father was standing beside my bed and woke me up. I dressed quickly. Mother wanted to stop and save her jewel case, but father said, I refuse to let myself and my 2 children be burnt for the sake of your jewel case. We hurried downstairs, and as soon as I was outside, I woke up.
Thank you. Thank you, Brigitte, in the film, and thank you to the filmmakers, and thank you to everyone involved in the production. We're very, very grateful for that. So we're now going to hand over to Brigitte in Vienna, and Brigitte there will read the dream again in English and also in German. And in the meantime, Julia will be still looking for pages from the book.
Thank you, Mark, for having me. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Fine. So the dream in English. A house was on fire. My father was standing beside my bed and woke me up. I dressed quickly. Mother wanted to stop and save her jewel case. But father said, I refuse to let myself and my 2 children be burnt for the sake of your jewel case. We hurried downstairs, and as soon as I was outside, I woke up.
Thank you, Brigitte. And would you mind now reading it in German and then reading it in English again? That would be, it would be great to hear it in the language that she said it to Freud. That's very moving.
Be happy to. In einem Haus brennt es. Der Vater steht vor meinem Bett und weckt mich auf. Ich kleide mich schnell an. Die Mama will noch ihr Schmuckkästchen retten. Der Papa sagt aber, ich will nicht, dass ich und meine beiden Kinder wegen deines Schmuckkästchens verbrennen. Wir eilen herunter und so wie ich draußen bin, wache ich auf. In English again?
Danke sehr. Yes, and in English, Vale. Danke.
A house was on fire. My father was standing beside my bed and woke me up. I dressed quickly. Mother wanted to stop and save her jewel case. But father said, I refuse to let myself and my 2 children be burned for the sake of your jewel case. We hurried downstairs, and as soon as I was outside, I woke up. It's a short dream.
Thank you. Yes, Brigitte. It's got lots there, though, so as we will find out when Zora reads the free association soon. And how did you find reading the dream in the room where she had told it?
It was very exciting, and it was a little bit of an investigation and process of deciding. One of the directors there, he accompanied us and this explained that they weren't sure where I read the dream for the first time really was the first practice room, but they figured it was the first practice room of Freud. And it was very exciting to be there and to be at that place. And I can really recommend for everybody to visit the new museum. It's very moving because they explain to you when Freud had to leave his bedroom, the bedroom that he had with his wife, and when later he worked and where he created the interpretation of dreams and where the practice was. And it's an exciting place. And it was an exciting experience to read the dream in the room where Ida or Dora was treated by Freud.
Right. Thank you. Right. And thank you very much for that, Brigitte.
No, thank you. Thank you for having us. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we very briefly, the panelists, attendees, chat people, anybody can just 1 or 2 people just say what it would be like if they had had that dream in their own life. We're only going to be quite brief on this because the event is about Dora and her life. So if Brigitte or anybody else.
May I say something, Mark?
Yes, there you go. There you go.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for having me. And it's a great honor to participate in this event. Having listened to the dream and having read the dream numerous times over the years, I'm absolutely sure that if I had it, it would have come with greater intensity and more affect. So if I had had a dream in which a house was burning or a house was on fire, I probably would have said, and I was in a state of fear, I felt anxious. If I'd had a dream in which I left the house and then woke up, I probably would have said to Freud, and I felt relieved. So whenever I hear or read a dream, I cannot help but notice what I consider to be a remarkable lack of affect in the context of the experiences that the dreamer, in this case the young girl called Dora, relates. And maybe it's just me, but I would definitely have experienced it with a greater deal of emotion, affect, excitement, agitation, shifting between fear and relief.
All right. Thank you very much, Danny, for saying how it would be for you. We've had one person on the chat, thank you, who said if they had had it, they would be feeling vulnerable and pleased to be rescued. And someone else saying, I'm surprised by how brief and blunt is the way that Dora has documented it. So it's just good for all of us to think, first of all, how would it be for us? Okay, I suggest we move on from that stage of the Allman process. Oh, I would feel my father cared, but my mum hadn't, is another person saying it. And someone else pointing out, of course, that this is, of course, how Freud documents Dora's narration. Yes. Okay, thank you. So that part, I would be scared if it reoccurred, another person. Thank you. Yes, yes. And of course it did reoccur. And part of the interest of this is when it reoccurred. And yes, and it's in German and English, which differ. Okay, thank you. That was only very brief because we just wanted to illustrate that we have used the Allman method, and that is a very brief component of it. But now what we do is we look at the general waking life background for Dora's life, just so that we can all know historically what is there before we come on to Dora's free associations to the dream. So the general waking life background, I'll just say, but then others may also want to say as well, that what was happening was Dora was in her mid-teens. The intimate relations between her father and her mother had ceased. And this was partly due to illnesses of the father. The father and Dora and the whole family had gone to Merano in the west of Austria, which is a spa town for cures for him. And he was nursed there by Frau K, who we now know, due to the high level of we now know, due to the biographies that have been written and people searching to find out what's there, is that they were moderately well off, Frau and Herr K. Frau K started the affair with, and Frau K and Dora's father started their affair. Dora some of the time would look after Frau K and Herr K's children, and this was sometimes while Frau K was having visits to her father. It soon became clear that Herr K was interested in Dora despite Dora's young age, and he would be giving her gifts. And there were two incidents, one in which he forced himself on her to kiss her, which apparently was only first told by Dora to Freud, that particular incident. So that had happened. What had then happened was she and her father stayed at a small wooden house in the country with the K's. She went on a boat trip with Mr. K, who propositioned her, saying he was not having intimate relations with his wife, and she slapped him. And what then happened was she had the dreams for another 4 nights. What happened 2 years later was her father, as I'd said earlier, asked Freud to see her, asked her to see Freud. She commenced seeing Freud because the father wanted her to, in his words, come to reason. Freud didn't do that. He did see her as being persecuted. And the very interesting thing is that the burning house dream and rescue dream, which had occurred 2 years before, shortly after, or immediately after Herr K had propositioned her, then recurred near the start of the psychoanalysis. And so I will now, yes, does anybody else who has knowledge of this wish to say anything about the circumstances? There's also obviously a major circumstance around of increasing anti-Semitism in Austria happening. Herr K was a major industrialist, and they had moved to Vienna before moving to Murano. They'd moved to Vienna, which was where Dora was born. They then moved to Murano. They were very, very involved in public life there, as were Herr and Mrs. K, who had started to become involved in banking, and the banking arrangements had also got involved with Dora's father's work. So that's their life in Vienna and in the spa town. I'll just stop for a moment and just leave it that in case others have knowledge of this, they can put any comments in. Dora then left the psychoanalysis. So I'm just, anybody can speak or comment.
May I say something, Mark?
Yeah, there you go. There you go, Danny.
Is that all right, Mark?
Yes, that's very much all right. Yes, I'm just wanting to, oh, were both families Jewish? Somebody had said, yes, they were both Jewish. Both families were Jewish. That's correct. Yes, both families were Jewish. And so they were obviously feeling the increased anti-Semitism that was around at that time and been around with various politicians since the end of the, including the end of the 19th century. Otto Bauer, her elder brother, became a socialist politician in Austria after the First World War. And part of this is also that, of course, she wasn't able to go to university, whereas he was able to go to university, and he became a very famous social democrat leader in Austria after the First World War. And we showed a photo of them both in younger life earlier on, so they were close in their lives. Yes, there you go, Danny.
Thank you, Mark. I thought that maybe it would be worth mentioning that Dora did not go to see Freud voluntarily, that she was actually sent to Freud by her father. Or to put it another way, that when she went to see Freud, that in itself was already for her in response to her father's insistence that she go and see Freud. And the direct reason as to why her father wanted his daughter to go and see Freud is not so much that his daughter had been suffering, as we know, from various symptoms over the course of her young life, but that her father had found a suicide note. So her father became concerned that his daughter was actually at risk of harming herself, and therefore insisted that she go and see Freud. I thought it was worth mentioning because clients, in the broadest possible sense, who come to see therapists not of their own accord, but because someone else insists that they do, are generally not nearly as cooperative as those who come voluntarily.
Yes, thank you, Danny. Yes, no, thank you for those details there. She had left a note, a suicide note, which comes into the second dream. We hope to have a second event like this, which marks when the second dream was told, which we hope to have in January. But yes, there were various issues to do with headaches, not being able to speak, and various other symptoms that she'd shown, which were reasons to go to Freud. We've had a question of, was it unusual for a woman from a relatively well-off family to provide care services? Yes, I do not know. Maybe somebody knows that. But part of the issue was that Peppina, as we now know, did assist with the nursing, and that's when the affair started. We've had another note. Hansel Enneker and Philip Bauer were co-founders of the Königswasser Stiftung in Murano, which funded the construction of the city's synagogue. So yes, they were very involved with the Jewish community there in that city. Has anyone seen the suicide note? We have a reply on that, not that I'm aware of, and I'm not aware of that either. Did anybody else have questions about the history of this? There's a famous book which is details the history of it, which has got considerable detail about Dora in it, including how she then left Europe. There's the assumption that when Ida could not take care of her father anymore, Peppina took over. Yes, because Ida's mother wasn't willing to help her husband. Yes, that there is the possibility that a sexually transmitted disease had been passed to her mother, I understand. And so Ida's mother wasn't willing to help her husband, so Peppina had taken over. From Laura, was Freud unknown at the time? That's a very good question. He had just written Interpretation of Dreams early in 1900. It was published at the very start of 1900. So this case arose when that had been published, and he was then becoming quite famous because of that, although the Interpretation of Dreams was very disputed. And so there were people in its favor and those who were against it. And so that is one of the reasons why this case study is so important, because it was the first one, as I said earlier on, of a full dream matched with a full life. Were there any details about Dora's sexuality or personal relationship that were discussed? Yes, there were, because that was one of the things we were not addressing. There is a lot in Freud's book about what his beliefs about Dora's sexuality were. She was reading sexual books with Frau K, or what at the time were medical sexual books, and had a very close relationship with Frau K. And the interesting thing is that which the Decker book points out, that both Frau K and Dora were then teaching bridge in Vienna together in the 1930s. So they were very close to each other, Dora and Frau K, at the same time as Herr K propositioning Dora. So was Freud unknown at the time? No, he was becoming more and more famous. Was the mother aware of the affair and the advances? Thank you, Danny. Yes, because Dora at one point told her mother, but her mother, according to Dora, didn't believe her. What was being said was that Dora had tried to tell everybody this was happening. Was Freud, right, that's an interesting one. Were there many ways to treat suicidality at the time? Was Freud the only person Dora could be sent to? Thank you very much for that. Yes, Herr K, Dora's father had been to see Freud some years previously about another condition. So he probably sent her to Freud because he knew Freud. Freud's use of the term hysteria seems jarring to modern ears, as it has connotations of overreaction or exaggeration. Dora's reaction to a real possibility of rape is not an overreaction. Yes, thank you for that, Paul. Yes, part of the whole issue here is that Dora's circumstances were quite hard, were very unpleasant. And as Freud said, she was being persecuted. And that also is with these propositions and a forced kiss occurring. Is her analysis then merely an attempt to get Dora to cooperate? Yes. Oh, thank you, Danny. Danny could even possibly answer that. Her father was quite concerned, but according to Dora, he was wanting her to allow the affair to continue. Katerina, thank you. Actually, Hans Zellinger recommended Freud to Philip Bauer, which makes it even more interesting. Yes, and there's even a recent paper saying that Hans Zellinger, Herr K, and Philip Bauer both visited Freud when Philip Bauer went there for a consultation previously. So these people do know each other. Yes, indeed, Katerina, the plot thickens. Yes. Well, thank you for all those comments. And I think we can understand now the wider context of all of this. So what I would like to do now is to turn over to Dora Wesley in Vienna. She's a student at the University of Vienna. And Dora has the free associations that Dora made that were then published by Freud. So I would invite Dora to kindly read out the free associations.
Hello, and also thank you very much to give me the chance to be part of this. So I'm gonna read the 4 associations of Dora. Okay. For her first free association, which refers to the time that the dream occurred when Dora was seeing Freud in November 1900, Dora spoke about how recently her father and mother had been having a dispute because her father did not want her mother to lock the dining room door at night, as her brother's room could only be reached through the dining room. Her father said something might happen in the night, so that it might be necessary to leave the room, and this had made Dora think of fire. She then free associated to when the dream first occurred in the summer of 1898. She free associated to the time when she and her father arrived to stay at the cave. Her father was afraid of fire in the cave's small wooden house because of a violent thunderstorm. She also said that the recurrent dream started after the scene by the lake. The scene by the lake refers to the time Dora slept Herr K after he had propositioned her. She stayed at the cave house for 4 more nights, on each night dreaming the same dream. Freud concluded that the dream, when it first occurred, was an immediate effect of Dora's experience with Herr K at the lake. Dora gave another free association that, after returning with Herr K from the lake, she had gone to lie down in her bedroom to have a short sleep, but suddenly awoke to see Herr K standing beside her. Freud's reply was, "Just as you saw your father standing beside your bed in the dream," to which Dora said yes, and that this episode with Herr K had put her on her guard. The next morning she had locked herself in while dressing, but later that day the key to the room she was staying in was gone, and she believed that Herr K had removed it. Freud observed that the theme of locking or not locking a room also appeared in the exciting cause of the recent recurrence of the dream. Freud next asked about the "I dressed quickly" phrase in the dream. Dora replied that she had made up her mind not to remain at the cave without her father, as she felt afraid that Herr K would surprise her while she was dressing. "So I always dress very quickly." Freud replied, "I understand. On the afternoon of the day after the scene in the wood, you formed your intention of escaping from his persecution, and during the second, third, and fourth nights, you had time to repeat that intention in your sleep." Freud then asked about the jewel case. Dora replied that a year before the dream first occurred, her father and mother had a great dispute about a piece of jewelry he had bought her, which she did not want. She was furious and told him that as he had spent so much money on a present she did not like, he had better give it to someone else. Dora stated that her father would indeed give jewelry to her mother and herself as cover for when he was giving jewelry to Frau K. Dora also said that Herr K had given her an expensive jewel case a little time before. So that were the 4 associations of Dora. I hope I read it slowly enough.
Yes, you read that slowly enough, Zora. That was wonderful. Thank you. I'm just wondering whether it would be possible and whether attendees would value if those could just be said again. Would that be okay? Just because would that be okay? There's about 5 of them, and then people can think about how do these match the dream, which we come to later as part of the Allman process. So thank you, Zora. Over to you again in Vienna. Thank you.
For her first free association, which refers to the time that the dream occurred when Dora was seeing Freud in November 1900, Dora spoke about how recently her father and mother had been having a dispute because her father did not want her mother to lock the dining room door at night, as her brother's room could only be reached through the dining room. Her father said something might happen in the night, so that it might be necessary to leave the room, and this had made Dora think of fire. She then free associated to when the dream first occurred in the summer of 1898. She free associated to the time when she and her father arrived to stay at the cave. Her father was afraid of fire in the cave's small wooden house because of a violent thunderstorm. She also said that the recurrent dream started after the scene by the lake. Scene by the lake refers to the time Dora slept Herr K after he had propositioned her. She stayed at the K's house for 4 more nights, on each night dreaming the same dream. Freud concluded that the dream, when it first occurred, was an immediate effect of Dora's experience with Herr K at the lake. Dora gave another free association, that after returning with Herr K from the lake, she had gone to lie down in her bedroom to have a short sleep, but suddenly awoke to see Herr K standing beside her. Freud's reply was, "Just as you saw your father standing beside your bed in the dream," to which Dora said, "Yes," and that this episode with Herr K had put her on her guard. The next morning she had locked herself in while dressing, but later that day the key to the room she was staying in was gone, and she believed that Herr K had removed it. Freud observed that the theme of locking or not locking a room also appeared in the exciting cause of the recent recurrence of the dream. Freud next asked about the "I dressed quickly" phrase in the dream. Dora replied that she made up her mind not to remain at the cave without her father, as she felt afraid that Herr K would surprise her while she was dressing. So I always dressed very quickly. Freud replied, I understand. On the afternoon of the day after the scene in the wood, you formed your intention of escaping from his persecution, and during the second, third, and fourth nights, you had time to repeat that intention in your sleep. Freud then asked about the jewel case. Dora replied that a year before the dream first occurred, her father and mother had a great dispute about a piece of jewelry he had bought her which she did not want. She was furious and told him that as he had spent so much money on a present she did not like, he had better give it to someone else. Dora stated that her father would indeed give jewelry to her mother and herself as cover for when he was giving jewelry to Frau K. Dora also said that Herr K had given her an expensive jewel case a little time before. Those were the associations again. Should I read another time?
That's great. No, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That's really great, Zora. Thank you very much. And that's great. And I just wanted, I haven't welcomed Katharina Adler, who is there on the chat and who we're very honored to have today, who is the author of the novel Ida, which you can see there, a book about Ida Bauer. And Katharina Adler is a German author. We're very grateful to her. Coincidentally, she is also Ida's great-granddaughter, and it's great to have you, Katharina. And Katharina will also be with us on the second event that we're due to have that marks the end of her psychoanalysis. Thank you, Zora. That's great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we've now got, we had a question there about was Herr K standing at the bed before the lake incident? Very good question. Zora?
So in the association it is stated that it was after the lake incident. So they came back from the lake and then she went to go for a sleep. And then he was standing next to her bed. Yes,
thank you. And then, as well as that, after the scene by the lake, as it's called, the lake incident, she then realised that the key to the bedroom was missing as well, and she worried that Herr K had caused the key to go missing so that she wouldn't be able to lock herself in. Thank you very much, Dora. That's really nice to hear that. Thank you. So the next thing we do that's correct. Thank you, Danny. The lake incident precedes Dora seeing Mr. K standing in front of her. Thank you. Great, thank you. What we do next is, what next happens in the Allman procedure is after the dreamer has said these free associations. And before we try to tie together the dream to the free associations and to what we know of the person's life, there's another brief period in which the dream is told by a member of the group to the dreamer in the second person. So, there was a fire and you woke up and whatever. Now, because we don't have the dreamer with us, I thought it was more appropriate for it to be done just in a normal third person, but we've just had all the free associations. So if Brigitte was able to read the dream again in English, that would be great, because that way we can be reminded of the dream, and then think about the mappings and links between them. Over to you, Brigitte.
Her house was on fire. My father was standing on my bed and woke me up. I dressed quickly. My mother wanted to stop the school. Father, I used myself and my 2 children be burned for the sake of your jewel case. We hurried downstairs, and as soon as I was outside, I woke up.
Thank you very much, Brigitte. Thank you. That's great. Thank you. So now what we do is I would invite attendees, panelists, to consider ways in which Dora's dream is related to her waking life circumstances. Freud's view, when she first told him the free associations, was that it was a wish that her father would rescue her from this situation. And as we know, and as has been related, when the dream first happened, she did indeed hope her father would rescue her. This was before she had confronted her father and Herr K, and her father had said, and her father had sided with Herr K. And so we can just relate first the fact that Freud did think that there was a wish here, which carried over the nights until she was able to leave, and that it depicted her wish of being rescued by her father. Thank you, Laura. She had to get dressed before fleeing the house. She felt she had to get clothes before thinking about her safety. Thank you. I dressed quickly, yes. Let's not forget that if that's in the dream, from what Laura said, Laura, I appreciate what you said. You know, some people would think you rush out quickly, whether you're clothed or not. But the really interesting thing is that in a dream, there is often many memories being put together into the dream and creating the dream. And so she manages to put into it the escape, the wish to be rescued, the fire, because the situation is dangerous. But she also put in an I dressed quickly, because as she said in one of her free associations, I dressed quickly is another example of how she is concerned and frightened, because she, as in one of her free associations, she in waking life was having to dress quickly out of concern for her door not being locked. Just to mention to everybody that Freud's method, Freud said that during the night, our memories and our wishes come together. And are depicted in the dream. And that what can happen then is that the dream depicts all of those, but when we look at the dream, the free associations follow the memories back to those that were there before, which were creating the dream to happen. Yes, so that's where we get that bit from. We've got here, yes, Danny quite rightly saying in her waking life, she tended to dress quickly when she was in the K's house because she was afraid. So there's lots of instances of fear being depicted in the one scene. So it's what Freud noticed, that there can be memories coming together to create one coherent scene. Maybe in part a wish for her father to be concerned about her. Yes, indeed. Which she was obviously wishing. Thank you, Reverend Danny. Thank you. So the narration perhaps is unreliable. factors being involuntary, Freud's reckon. What do we think of the unreliability? Yes, maybe some of our panel would have a thought about that. Rodrigo, thank you for that comment. Yes, can we say that Dora's dreams tell us about her feelings of being unable to handle and deal with her own desires? Now that's very interesting. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to have the event, is that when you look just at Dora's free associations, she does not say that she has feelings for Herr K. And so looking at this just from an Allman point of view and just from a almost surface level, people's own reports of how they feel in waking life, what they're afraid of or wish, that's what's occurring in the dream. Now, Freud himself did say that she has her own desires about Herr and Frau K. We can discuss those. Those were ones I was thinking might not be so much part of the historical record, and part of the interesting thing about the dream was that just looking at the historical record of the dream does seem to be understandable. We've got various other comments. Are her father's wishes being acted out by Herr K? Do please answer to each other if you wish. Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Danny, for that. There was another free association that came later in the case study, or a little bit later, after these ones, where there was an association of the fact that both Herr K, when he had propositioned her, had obviously been smoking, and the association between that and fire. Yes, thank you for that, Danny. Are there any suggestions on the relationship between Dora and her mother? Right. That's an excellent question from Alice. Are there any suggestions on the relationship between Dora and her mother, and why she dreamed her mother to prioritize her jewelry over her children's safety? That's a very interesting one. This goes back to an event at the Freud Museum in London last year, which Danny had organised. I'm very grateful to Danny and to the Freud Museum for doing that, in which I had asked the question that, given that in real life, in a way, it is Dora's jewel case which is in danger, why does the dream depict the jewel case being owned by the mother? And that's a very interesting question. I don't know if Danny knows a bit more about the relationship between the two. Yes, that's true. He does interpret the jewel case as symbolising the female genitalia, and that's where the witty reply from Dora saying, "I knew you would say that," comes. The mother, we know, was very concerned about the cleanliness of the house. I knew you would say that, Mark. Yes. Yes, it's a funny, you do get a sense of Dora when she is reported by Freud as having said, "I knew you would say that," because he's pointing out that the jewel case can symbolize the genitalia, and in real life it is in danger. How on earth they make the connection of the jewel case to her virginity? That's probably a projection. It may be a projection of Freud. It's certainly Freud who raises it. That's very correct, Anna. It's Freud who raises that. But
I I have a comment.
Ah, great.
I've got my mic on, but my video won't come on, but that's fine. I was just going to say that I thought that lots of the things that we were puzzling about were a fairly direct result of Freud's tending not to do any of the things that modern approaches to dream work would do, of back to Danny's comment on what an unemotional dream it is for dramatic events happening. With the Allman method or any modern one, we would tend to ask, did you have any feelings in the dream? Did you have any feelings about your mother stopping to try to save the jewel box? And sort of not assume that there were no feelings, but also not assume that the feelings were whatever those events would stir up in us. And because we don't have that, I think that's part of what's so puzzling about the mother. I mean, in the dream, just the events, you know, if we were saying, if it were my dream, I'd be very upset with my mother that she was stopping to get jewelry instead of rushing me out of a burning building. But since Freud ends up interpreting the jewels as the daughter's virginity, I wonder if there's some hint in what Dora said that does not make it into the explicit case record, that she saw the mother wanting to protect the jewels as some positive thing, which we just don't know what she feels about any of these elements. And I think that's the biggest missing piece, even though we have rich associations in every other way.
Yes, thank you, Deirdre. Yes, and we just had a comment from Katerina about, it seems that Ida was more attached to her father, whereas Otto, the brother, was on the mother's side. And Danny's saying Dora's at the same time enthralled by Mrs. K. I'm grateful to Deirdre for that, because it raises the issue of why it's the mother's jewel case. I have discussed this with Julia, who doesn't agree or would have her own view on this later, that there is a patriarchal view on this, which I will just tentatively put out that, and this bears back to when we were at the Freud Museum, Danny and I said, why is it the mother's jewel case rather than Dora's jewel case, which is in danger? Because in real life, it's Dora's jewel case in danger. But it's so interesting to me that what the father says in the dream is, and if we can interpret this as her wishing her father to protect her. Father said, I refuse to let myself and my 2 children be burnt for the sake of your jewel case. Now, if that's the wish, with a patriarchal mindset and a quite oppressive mindset, and I know this is quite awful to say, and I'm more than happy for Danny or anyone, or Katerina, anyone, Deirdre, Brigitte, or any the attendees to say, no, this is just going too far, because she doesn't say this. Is it possible that she's saying, look, I wish that the protection of my mother's jewel case wasn't causing all of us to be in this danger, and that there is a blame which in modern sensibility and even then would be unfair, seen as unfair, but there is an unfair blame being put on the mother, that this situation is arising and causing the affair and causing what's happening to Dora, and leading to the whole scene. I will just put that out there because it's something I've wondered about, a reason why Dora is dreaming that it's the mother's jewel case, but in a way it's the mother's jewel case putting them all in danger. Deirdre, Dora could have cannily strategically designed the dream, or tweaked a real dream. That's great, Dora. Thank you, Deirdre. In order to get Freud to support Dora's desire for her father to remove her from Herr K. It could be a way of Dora getting Freud to tell her father that she is indeed in danger of being raped. Yes, that's great. Thank you, Deirdre. That's a really interesting one. Whether or
Mark,
not. Oh, Danny. Yes, there you go.
Mark, can I say something in response to Deirdre's comment? And I prefer to share it in this way rather than via the chat. But I think Deirdre touches upon a very important point. It's that Dora's dream, as it reoccurs in her analysis with Freud, really cannot be dissociated from the transference. It cannot, in the way it occurs and in the way she tells it to Freud, be disconnected from her own emotional tie to Herr Professor. And in a sense, Freud arrives too late at the understanding that both the content of the dream and the very moment at which it occurs is related to the position that he himself adopts in the treatment and the way in which Dora relates to him. Because Freud, at that point in his life, is very much, I would say, and some people may hate me for this, is very much himself rather infatuated by his position as a professor, as someone who aspires to be a professor. He says so in the case study, and as someone who is being consulted by this young girl. So he tends to overestimate the positive transference, and it stops him, it makes him blind to actually see that this girl is possibly really challenging him, is possibly actually, I wouldn't go so far as to say making up things, but is provoking him. So he's blind to that because Freud is unshakable in his belief that he himself is but an avatar of Mr. K, and that Dora is actually also secretly in love with him, Professor Sigmund Freud, going so far as to claim even that she, in her dream, had been acting upon a repressed wish that he, Sigmund Freud, would kiss her. So I just wanted to say that, Mark, because I think although this is a repetitive dream, the fact that it occurs at that moment during the analysis means that it cannot be disconnected from the fact that the analysis is taking place and that Freud is adopting a certain position within it. And Dora is way too clever to not see through that and to try and provoke him, which is also one of the reasons as to why she's generally considered to be a feminist icon, of course, because here is a young girl daring to challenge the Viennese master and patriarchal authority of dream interpretation. Thank you, Mark.
Yes, no, thank you, Danny. Danny, what you've just said is also very important, not only as a response to Deirdre, but also it's quite correct that we have to bear in mind that the dream occurred, unless I take Deirdre's point that Dora may have tweaked it. The dream had occurred 2 years before under situations of her wishing to be protected by her father. It then reoccurs when she's seeing Freud. Now, she says it reoccurred. Deirdre may be correct that we may have to wonder, was she telling the dream now and saying this has occurred again to me? But there is the transference issue of transference being, for everyone, the projection of the person in analysis onto the analyst, their own beliefs and desires, seeing the world onto the analyst. Now, one possibility is she's having the dream again then because she wants to be rescued by Freud. And one of the well-known things about having dreams in therapy is that the dreams can sometimes mirror the course of the therapy. And so she has this dream of being rescued by the older smoker, the older man. she's having this dream now with Freud as well. Without wanting to go into the next event, which we're having after the new year, she then has a dream that the older man is dead. This is when she leaves Freud and is dreaming of her father being dead. He hadn't died yet. So yeah, no, there are possibilities there of the usefulness of saying such a dream to Freud, you know, saying, I'm telling you, Freud, a dream that I need rescuing by an older man, or I'm needing help in this persecutory situation that I'm in. Anna, thank you. I generally consider fire as passion. Yes, precisely. You know, fire is passion or danger, could be. Deirdre, I agree, Mark. Today, a victim of sexual abuse would do everything to get their social worker to remove them from the abuse situation. Yes, Danny, one more thing from Danny. When Dora has the dream again, she's already told Freud that she... Is that true, Danny? Sorry, Danny, I thought she told that when she was presenting him with the second dream. And it was a surprise to him then. Danny, I think it gives him a pre-warning. Okay, we'll have to look into that. Thank you. Katharina, it's possible that she had high hopes of Freud at first, after he was the first person who believed her that her father had an affair. And according to the Decker book, he was also the first person that she confided the occurrence of the first scene of the forced kiss. Brigitta's got her video on. Hi, Brigitta.
Hi, Mark. Hi. I just wanted to add to the conversation earlier that, Dora was an 18-year-old girl, and the events had happened several years before, if I understood correctly. So, and she is in this mix of these affairs, and the mother doesn't want to connect with her father anymore. It must all be somewhat confusing, and I don't really see how she would intentionally kind of make up a story. I think that she is in need, and from reading the dream, I think the most urgency to me appears to be when she says that the father is standing by her bed. It's as if she is shocked all of a sudden that man is standing by my bed. And I think she feels threatened mostly, and in that confusion that the Jewel case belongs to the mother, meaning could be an identity figure for her, the mother as a female, doesn't puzzle me that much that this is her mother's Jewel case, and that the Jewel case is apparently kind of as important as getting rescued from the flames. The confusion, I think, is what I wanted to emphasize here.
I wanted to say something about the leaving of therapy, and this is panelist Deirdre, not the Deirdre who's been in the chat, but hi, namesake. I certainly agree with what Danny and a lot of commentators have said about it taking a certain amount of courage to terminate the therapy, and that's what therapists, have noticed about it. But I would say that I also find it interesting that in many of Freud's cases, young women who he was giving very patriarchal, what we would now see as sexist interpretations to, he has reported them being quite offended and seeming pretty dissatisfied with the therapy. And yet eventually they're still there. And so I'm struck that there may be a behind-the-scenes story that there were probably some other young women that wished to discontinue their therapy as much as Dora did, but that when Dora went home and said, I'm not going there anymore, that either her father or mother backed her up more easily than what some of these other patients encountered in continuing to be urged back there. So it's partly her taking that stand. And her initial symptom was losing her physical voice, and she had recovered her voice in the literal sense, but this may be metaphorically. But I also think it says something interesting about the behind the scenes, that, you know, they had sent her there, they could get her there if they wanted to, and yet they seem to have let her discontinue at this point, as to maybe she was getting a little more heard at home as she did not get heard by Freud.
Yeah, that is an interesting point, Deirdre. Thank you, about the fact that it may very well have happened to others as well who were forced to continue being in therapy by their families. She walked out. One other thing to note, though, is that as Freud reports, she then did go to the Ks and confronted them soon after leaving therapy, and there they admitted, Mr. K admitted what had happened. And from then on, it seems that Dora's father did admit what had been going on. I think that I'm correct on that. Danny might know more details about the history. Well, I think I'm correct on that.
Yes, you are correct, Mark.
Right, thank you. So there really was strength in her. You know, she then went to the Ks, to the Zelenkas, and confronted them, as well as leaving Freud. So maybe there was an issue with the family. They knew she was correct and unwilling to put up with the situation.
But she was getting a different response from the original people after she kind of went to Freud for him to do what her father and Herr K had not done about admitting this was the problem. Once Freud failed her and she didn't want to go there, she actually, I mean, Herr K did respond differently and her father did respond differently. So she sort of got it in, you know, she got it where she'd wanted it in the first place. Perhaps partly because of Freud failing to be the stand-in that became the good sympathetic father.
Yes. I'm just aware, actually, that we have had some comments on the Q&A in addition to the chat. The idea behind the Q&A was that it allows trails to occur, but I think we've had so much in the chat and so much to think about that we haven't fully engaged with the Q&A. If people would like to,
yeah, I answered a couple of Q&As, but I didn't realize they seemed to only go back to the one person asking them rather than show up anywhere.
Yes, no, that's great. Karim did. So thank you very much, Deirdre, for answering those. If anybody else wishes to answer some of them. So like Karim says, were there any details about Dora's sexuality or personal relationships discussed? Yes, there were. To me, the burning house is significant. It seems to reflect the situation becoming out of control and distressing to Dora. Yes, and certainly out of control, of needing to get out from the fire. Maybe she wanted her mother to accept the jewelry. Yes, whereas in real life, she knows that her mother knows that jewelry is also being given to Frau K. And that rejection of the jewelry is the lost intimacy. Any significance, thank you, Bethan, any significance to her not commenting who was safely out of the house after the fire? That she says, we hurried downstairs and as soon as I was outside, I woke up. Oh, I forgot that. That's true. Thank you, Bethan. She didn't seem to comment on who else got out. It was she who escaped. Yes, which was from Freud's point of view of her wishing to be herself out, not under these awful circumstances anymore, would be the solution. I guess you're less concerned about the others when that escape is occurring. It seems strange that in the dream, Dora's father represents both Dora's father and Herr K standing over her. Now, thank you, Nathan, for that. It seems strange that in the dream, Dora's father represents both Dora's father saving her from the building and Herr K standing over her when she's woken up in the dream and Dora dressing quickly. Yes, it was Freud who put it to her. This is a bit like Herr K standing over your bed. Yes. This is again one of those instances where a part of a dream can be linked to more than one thing. An anonymous attendee, 819, thank you. Is it possible that she blames her mother for even meeting Herr K? If her father didn't have an affair, she wouldn't have been in the nearness of Herr K. Now, thank you very much, anonymous attendee, who has said that that was my thought. This is one of the ones that I know may very well be disputed, that partly on the grounds that it's not fair on her to blame her mother. But then within a dream, maybe those thoughts come out of unfair blame. But thank you, anonymous attendee. Whether the dream is about blaming her mother, and it's her mother's jewel case that is putting them in danger. But I know there will be a dispute about, in a way, us projecting that onto Dora. We can't see everyone else's chat. Sorry, Irene, does something, I hope Irene can click on to chat and see things, because that seems to have been. Who can see the chat? I think when people go on to chat, they can. I'm so sorry. The chats should be seen. The chats could be seen by all other attendees if you wish them to. I know it's been set up not to be like that, so that we can answer questions in trails. But yes, I'm sorry about that. If people wish to press the chat, I think I have read out most of the chat comments, and so if anybody else wishes to put chat comments and send it to attendees and panelists, I think that will be possible at that point. I could ask our technical people. Irene, I can only see the panelists. Thank you. Yes, you can only see the panelists, but I'm just asking whether or not at this stage it may be possible for the chats, when people do a chat, to do it to all panelists and attendees. Yes, I've just noticed some of them are. Anna, I can't see other attendees' comments. Yes, I'm sorry about that. The chat was set up to see attendees' comments. I'm just wondering whether our technical people could allow that to happen, or that attendees can make sure that their messages go to other attendees. Irene says, yes, no, thank you, Irene. I didn't realize that. You can't click on attendees and panelists. I think I'll ask that to be done. Thank you. Right, yes, I've asked for that to be done. Do we have other comments? Oh, Deirdre, is there a sexually transmitted disease in play because of the swapping of the sexual dance partners? Then Dora risks being infected as well as her mother. Thank you, Dora. That's really quite correct. That is correct. I understand what you're saying, Deirdre. Deirdre's saying if there is a sexually transmitted disease in play because of the swapping of the sexual dance partners, then Dora risks being infected as well as her mother. If Herr K does attack her, well, that might explain the confusion over the dual case ownership, because what's happening to the mother's dual case is also going to happen to hers. Laura, thank you. Did Freud have a history of having inappropriate relationships with the young women of patients? Yes, thank you, Danny, who says no, not at all.
Although, as a woman, I would say that the things Danny's already pointed out about Freud interpreting so many things as being sexual impulses toward him from young women is inappropriate in a much subtler sort of way than sexually propositioning his clients. To always be telling them that they must be lusting after him is a much subtler version of that.
Sure, I agree with you, Deirdre. I think it's a very valid point to make. I was also going to say earlier, when we were talking about Dora's associations to the dream, that I'll turn on my video for a moment, that it's actually not easy to disentangle her associations to the dream and her associations to Freud's interpretations. So every time I read this particular section of the case study, I'm actually struck by how some of her associations in themselves, you could say, are always already contaminated by Freud's own presuppositions about feminine sexuality and sexual infantile wishes that are being repressed.
Laura, thank you, who says, I know looks are in the eye of the beholder, but was Freud at that time perceived to be handsome? Does anybody know? I mean...
Well, I'll take a shot at that one. I mean, this was at least in the era when all those pictures of him as a relatively young man with black hair rather than the sort of grandfatherly figure that we see in even more images. He was a young, bearded, and just personally, I'd say sort of a little better than average looking, not dramatically handsome is just my own take. You can easily Google the pictures of young Freud.
Yes, yes, thank you. If he thought the females liked him, thank you, Laura, who says, oh, right, okay, thank you. I think I've been told that the chat's open to all. Can people check that? Laura has said if he thought that females liked him, then maybe he thought, right, great. If he thought that, right, Laura has said if he thought that females liked him, then maybe he thought he was more attractive than average. Yes, there is this, he did have the view, and I think Danny has mentioned about her unconsciously wishing to kiss him.
I guess I would say I'm not sure that meant he thought he was more attractive than average. He well may have, but I think he probably didn't properly appreciate the difference between men and women in what proportion of the population they might be sexually attracted to. I mean, studies show that's a much smaller percentage of men for heterosexual women than vice versa. I think he doesn't show, even though he talks about female sexuality a lot, I don't think he appreciates that difference. And also, almost any time there's a question of something like Herr K, where a younger woman doesn't think she's attracted to her father or a friend of the family or whomever, he's very prone to seeing young women attracted to other older males also. So might or might not have anything to do with him thinking he's especially attractive. It seems a bias, you know, from a masculine perspective that surely most young women are wanting most of us, is kind of the vibe I get.
There was a comment there about how well would Freud have known her if he'd only just met her. I assume she was seeing him 5 days a week. So this would have been quite an intense level of self-revelation. Now, whether or not he was able to take things on board is another issue, but there would have been a lot of time spent talking. That's in answer to Anna saying, I don't think Dora would have been in analysis long enough for Freud to know her that well. Thank you for all these comments, which are coming fast and furious. The associations definitely do not occur in a vacuum, says Danny. Thank you. They're also part of the transference, as we said earlier. Now, we've got this one here. Thank you. Thank you very much for that one. Not knowing anything about dream analysis, would Dora's dream be interpreted the same way if she went to a psychologist today? Now, one of the reasons I will allow, please, other people, please do comment on that. I've just been told by Dan it's 6 days a week she would have seen him. So that's for 50 hours. So that is a considerable amount of self-revelation time. On the point about would Dora's dream be interpreted the same way if she went to a psychologist today? And other panelists may disagree with this, but what Freud did at first of getting her free associations would be what a lot of therapists would do. You know, what does that part of the dream mean to you? What does the other part, where does that come from? Tell me, you know, and tracing back the dream to the possible waking life memory sources that created it. That would be done by a lot of therapists today, that part. The point where the case history then goes way beyond that is the level of additional supposition or thoughts that Freud then lays on top of it. But my view would be that a lot of therapists would use that first part of the method, which does coincide quite a lot with Allman's method of Allman asking what recently has caused these parts of the dream. I appreciate you can then go deeper into things than to just look at the recent few days. So I would answer that question, that the dream would be interpreted the same way by many psychologists today. We've now got lots more messages. So Katharina said, especially from our modern perspective, a 15-year-old girl has probably more adolescent feelings than an 18-year-old young adult. And some of this is occurring when she's really very early teens. Paul has said a very interesting question about the ethics of all of this. I did get an email during the week by somebody who's looked into the history, who said that although Freud had tried to anonymize Dora, she would have been known to many people from reading the case history. So there is an issue where modern ethics might be, you would have to get somebody's approval in order to write up the case study, I assume. And we've now, as this person says, well, clearly all the participants are long dead, but for example, we have revealed their true identities. And what are the rules on this now? So I assume the rules now are you can't write up a case history without telling the person you're going to do so. Dora, incidentally, the way it was found out that it was her was a psychoanalyst saw her some years later and realized who she was. And that was how we now know that Dora was Ida Bauer. We've now got rather a large number of messages coming through.
Mm-hmm. I would say one thing, though, about modern guidelines, they really vary if you read different ethical suggestions for writing up case studies. Some say that you should get the patient's permission, but also sort of imply that once you do, everything is fine. Others put less emphasis on that because, of course, some patients being written about are quite psychotic, and the idea of informed consent is not that clear with lots of case studies. And others put much more emphasis on disguising them so that no one else would be able to recognize them. And some do a combination of those two. But I think the same ideas were in place then, but were treated much more casually, and that we've gotten much stricter, but it's still not all one norm for that.
Can I just remind everybody, we've now had that chat to all attendees allowed, so please do make sure that you, in the to box, ensure that all panelists and attendees is ticked. Steve said, is the thinking that the dream can be interpreted differently each time it is dreamed? I don't know if the STD, Steve also said, this person also says the STD issue would not have been apparent at the time of the first dream. Yes, I mean, Dora would have known that her father was ill. I think she may have suspected that there was a sexually transmitted disease aspect to the family going on. So that may have been present in the first time the dreams were happening and in the latter time. But it is interesting that the dream seems to have been provoked, or seems to have occurred on separate occasions. Oh, thank you, Katerina. As a relative of Dora, thank you, Katerina, because you are her great-granddaughter. I do have mixed feelings about Freud publishing our family history. Thank you, Katerina. That's very interesting. That is interesting. The psychoanalyst who claimed that he mentioned, we realized who Dora was, he claimed that she seemed proud of having been that patient, but that still has the issue of whether or not it's correct for him to have published the family history. And especially because if people read the case history, there is a very extreme level of his own beliefs and his own findings in his own sense of her sexuality and of her unconscious desires, that she unconsciously wished to be with Herr K. And there is a very large amount of that going on there. So as Katerina said, Katerina, thank you, that there's mixed feelings about Freud publishing the family history. It's not just, I'm sure Katerina would agree, there's not just history going on. There is also a very large level of claims by Freud about Dora, which many people would say are not present in the history. Lesbian feelings towards Frau K, for example. So it may be worse than Katerina has said in saying that she has mixed feelings about Freud publishing the family history. Was the content of the dream exactly the same every time? According to what Freud said, I think it was. He doesn't say that it differs. He doesn't say that it differed from the 4 times it happened 2 years previously to the time when he was with Freud. Dora, for the historical record, Dora was treated again by the psychoanalyst Felix Deutsch, who was also Freud's personal physician at the time, and she allegedly had nothing but good things to say about her former analysis by Freud. By that time, Freud's case study had obviously been published, yet Deutsch reported later that Dora had felt really proud when she saw how she had been turned into a case study. So that's the claim from Deutsch, which is a chapter in the book in Dora's case, which has a large amount of separate chapters about her.
But Katerina says about Deutsch, Felix Deutsch was also Ida's physician and the physician of my father in New York. He never mentioned that he would write about her.
Yes, yes, which backs up Katerina's point. Yes. I mean, can I just mention from the point of view of having this event, because it has been raised to me, I have wondered about this because before of planning it with Julia Lockheart, about how do we feel about putting all this about Dora out there, which again is without her consent in a way. My view of that was that the case history had been so overlaid with antagonism towards Freud that I did quite like the idea of looking at her dream and what she said about the dream and concentrating on that, that's a way of honouring her and the strength she had. But I agree, as Deirdre has just said, she hasn't given any consent to be spoken about. Yes.
Yeah, I kind of like that we are at the topic of potential abuse, because I think that's kind of the topic of the dream and Dora's situation there. And I'm glad that this is mentioned, that it could be considered a little abusive as well when Freud is simply talking about Dora and the family and what is going on in that family. And that could be, I mean, if it was my family, I wouldn't be very happy with having all this on the table. And it shows about this situation at the Viennese society at the turn of the century. From that point of view, it's interesting, but from another point of view, it's, I think, important that that topic is being brought up, of abuse and of how to be more careful about the clients, and how Freud may have not been that careful.
Yeah, in modern times, one would certainly never put anything out there without very explicit permission from the client, and sort of only if you felt like the client was really making a freely and informed consent. But there's less agreement on after the client is dead. There was a kind of famous case in the US where a major biographer of the poet Anne Sexton consulted with Morton Orne, who'd been her long-term therapist, and Orne turned over all of his session notes with Anne Sexton to the biographer, who quoted extensively and talked in detail about things that went on in the therapy. And there was talk of filing a complaint with the licensing board in Pennsylvania, where Orne practices. He was getting very ill and was very old at the time, and nothing came of that. But the legal experts that weighed in could not agree on whether the right to confidentiality survives death or not, and if it survives, whether no one could give permission, or the legal heirs in a money sense could give permission to therapy records. That has not been sorted out in our courts.
Somebody's actually said that Herr K can't defend himself, which is true. It's now known who he was, and he was a very from the paper I've seen, which has just come out in Journal of Austrian Studies on this. There seems to be a great deal that's very positive about him and his life and work and religious and community activities. But yes, it's true. He is not there to defend himself either. We've had the comment, why is everybody assuming she had hidden feelings about Freud? Yes, I mean, Freud was saying she... Yes, thank you, Tanya. Katerina, but there are also interviews with Ida's cousin, who also claimed that Hans Zernike kept making advances towards her. Those interviews are in the Freud papers in the Library of Congress, yes. And also there is, even within the case study, Ida is saying that Herr K had an affair with a servant of his who had to leave. So there is that side to Herr K, yes. Yes, and Ash, thank you. Could not her slapping Freud, metaphorically, at the end of the analysis be her wish to slap Herr K? Yes. And Anna saying, yes, it's the people who revealed the names of the subjects that we should have questions about. So this is, yes, the biographers and those talking about that.
Although if Freud failed to disguise her adequately, I would think of him as bearing a bit of the responsibility for that.
Mm. Yes. We've had the comment, it would appear that, it would also appear that Mrs. K wanted to punish her philandering husband by starting the affair with Herr Bauer. Yes. Mark, Deirdre, Mark, thanks for being a skillful conductor for our chorus's voice. Thanks also for the wonderful panelists. Yes, we are approaching 9 o'clock. Yes, yes. Are you okay, Julia? I'll just find out how close. Yes, Julia's still painting.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to speak.
Julia's happy to speak. So Danny says the relation between Ida and Mrs. K is by far the most important one to tease out, I think, and they were very close. They were indeed very close. That is very interesting. We've officially got about 3 minutes left. So what I will do is, if people can look at the painting, which is now just about finished.
Well, so, it's not quite finished. But
not
anyway,
quite finished, but
it is what it is at the moment. So yeah, I seem to just be take longer and longer on these things as the, we used to do these in 20 minutes, which I can't believe. We used to do them in 20 minutes, and now what was that, 2 hours really. I don't decide on the page before the event. I just let the thing happen with the event. So I flick through the book and find the page. But as you can see,
you're still seeing Mark on the big screen, and I think we'd like to see the drawing on the big screen.
Oh, right. Okay, let me go off. Sorry about that. I'm off. Can everybody see a film of Julia speaking? Because I've hoped that I have. Can everyone see Julia?
No, that reverted to your still picture.
That one reverted my still picture. I should have another one showing Julia. Can people not see?
Can the image be seen?
I see a tiny image labeled Mark that has Julia as a little person, and then I see one labeled Julia Lockheart that has the picture, but it's a tiny.
That's great. Thank you very much, Deirdre, for clarifying that. Yes, there's a small one. The only way that can be made central is if I swap the camera around on this one.
Could this person who's controlling the Zoom, could they make that picture central?
Could the technicians, Alan, could you kindly turn off me? That means making me unpinned, I think. Whoops, that's messed that up. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure that can I be removed from the okay, how does it look now? Are we mainly getting just Julia, or is it my icon occurring?
It's still your handsome face.
Sorry, the view is correct for the audience. It's different for the panel. The panel can't be controlled from our end.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alan. That's great.
Okay,
Great. So everyone can see Julia.
I'll
Julia's
point
painting.
the last thing that isn't really finished is the jewel case up here. But anyway, this is Dora grabbing her clothes, getting dressed and rushing down the stairs. Here are the stairs. Here's the father. And I kind of have him very much with his arms reaching out for his children. So he's kind of reaching around for Dora, and he's got his arm around his son. And Otto's pulling on his trousers and got his bare feet. And then the mother is here pointing at the jewel box. So she's kind of reaching round. It's very interesting that as she reaches, as I say, I don't choose these pages at all beforehand, so I never know what's going to be on them. I choose them because of the sort of shapes I'm getting. But interestingly, in this whole area here, there's a whole thing about female genitals, sexual theory, etc., which is then up near the jewel box. And then here we've got a lady and her daughter is in the jewel box. I haven't quite finished it, as you can see, but I thought this was interesting. In Herr, what's the father's name again?
Philip.
In Philip's hair, it says resort. And it's interesting that they were in this area because he had gone to a resort, spa resort. So also down here is interesting, 17.17 in the notes. It says 17, accompanying hysterical symptoms, amenorrhea and profound depression were the chief troubles of this patient. So that was just one of the notes for what was on the page already. I have the dream over here, and again it has 17. A child her father had not known. And again up here, her father is in the bed spread. Then all is in the window up here, which is on fire, because I thought, you know, they were all in the fire. They were all caught together. It was very much a family thing. It wasn't Dora on her own, but also the way that the page fell, Dora is kind of on her own, even though her father's reaching across to her. The action, you know, places her on her own by her bed. So things like in his pajamas, we have the word men. Here, case by a female, a dream which was confused. Her father, the dreamer, the father, therefore, was a fragment, is in her skirt. So this is kind of what I'm doing as you're all talking. Oh, in her brother's head, it says boyish. He tries boyish and fantasy. And then in his clothing, it says characteristic, a male. And then the other thing is really interesting is in the text, it says Fraulein K.
Yeah.
So he must have used these initials for lots of people, but Fraulein K happens twice in the text. So I thought I'd pull that out as well. I don't know how well you can see it, or if anyone has any points.
Deirdre has just written, wonderful painting, Julia. This is Deirdre in America. The body language of the figures is very expressive.
Yes, so this is the back of the mother, Fraulein. It isn't Fraulein K, but this is the back of the mother reaching up. Oh yes, in the body. Oh yes, this is interesting. In the body of the mother, it says perfectly indifferent and interruption. So I thought that was quite interesting in her dress. And then here it says the interpretation is based on a dark place in the dream and informs us. So just, they're like poems almost that I'm just pulling out that have a meaning for me when I'm listening to what you're all saying. Or any questions?
Anna has said, I am interested in the father's groin, the darkened green.
Oh. Well, interestingly, just right by his groin, it says a male. And up here, this is the top of his pajamas. And it says men in his pocket. I think, yeah, I'm just trying to make it have some kind of three-dimensionality, as I'm trying to do with these skirts. That's really interesting. In the skirt, the father, therefore, was a fragment. I quite like that.
Danny has written, absolutely terrific, Julia. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
Especially since the dream is both made up of images and text.
Yes.
And that for Freud, the dream is always a rebus.
That's it. It is a rebus. That's what I'm doing. I'm sort of unpicking all this information of Freud, and he underpins, you know, what I'm finding in the text, and it is a rebus. I'm very much a detective, seeking out words that make sense. Oh, over here as well, it said undressing to go to bed, interestingly, in his clothing, which I know they're dressing, but
Brigitte said, great painting, Julia, great poems you are pointing out. And of course, as people who've seen us before will know that the words are there pretty much by chance, because Julia chooses the page on the basis of the shape of the paragraphs, and the words are often spookily relevant, which is nice. What do the jewels say? Says
up here,
is another
lady and her daughter. Then there are some. Recall the content, the dream. But the interesting thing is this part, which for me is kind of like meant to be like a carpet, you know, sort of going up to the jewel case. It's all about genitals, female sexual theory, infantile. Just kind of interesting. I haven't quite finished, but yeah, I seem to get slower and slower at this every time, and I think maybe it's just I'm getting older, but I started off doing very, very quick ones, and to me these still seem quite quick.
Can everyone hear Julia okay? Could I just have a quick message back to say that that people can hear her? Yes. That's fantastic. Thank you. That's great. Somebody said, you said it wasn't, and somebody said, great, good job on the painting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
One person has said, what would you have added? Because you seem to say it wasn't quite finished.
Oh, well, only that I would probably work in this area here, and I would probably work in that area there to just pull out some of the words more clearly. But I'm really happy with, for example, and I might put, I want to put some, it's just the painting isn't finished for me. So I would put some decoration here on this dress to show that, you know, it's a nightgown with a kind of ruff on it. So I'd make that a bit clearer, things like that, and maybe put some other colours on in places. So, yeah.
One person says it says male organ to be specific by his groin. I'm glad that people can actually read the words on it. When we put this up on the internet afterwards,
I've missed that myself.
When we put this on the internet afterwards, we'll tweet it and we'll put it on our website. And so what people can do then is to expand the painting, and they can read some of these words that Julia has chosen.
We can actually find
when she finds
original
them.
page. We can find the page in here because this book hasn't been used. So. Yes, so if on page 215,
this is the first English translation that Julia's using. Another person says, great painting, Julia.
Oh, it is as well, which attributes a male organ to women. My goodness. Well, there you go. I'm working so closely in a male organ right by, and actually that would be, see, I didn't see that, but that would be very phallic, but it's sort of in the boy's leg. For me, that's Otto's leg there, rather than it is sort of it is sort of the father, but for me that's a foreshortening of the boy's leg as he's pulling on his trousers. So yes, I hadn't seen that.
Danny said, interesting how the mother's face cannot be seen.
Yes, well, I nearly didn't, my choice was nearly to not put the mother in at all, because the father is looking out, you know, as if to say, I think his face is no, you know, that was what I was trying to show. It's like a real, you know, Dora's just getting her clothes on. She's occupied with that. And the boy is getting his clothes on. But the father, for me, is like a kind of, you know, talk to the hand type character. He's sort of saying, no, you are not, you know, it's very much the father, the paternal kind of, you're not going back for your jewel case. That's what it is for me anyway.
Somebody else mentions the orange bed linen.
Well, for me, it was red. It's not bed linen. It's
oh no, that's not.
It's meant to be a it's white bed linen here, which is interesting because it says here in the pillow, it says 17, the child story. It's hard because as I paint over things, but yeah, 17, the child story, and then this red, pink red bed. It's meant to be like not a duvet, but you know how they used to have eider downs. It's meant to be an eider down with like, you know, with the suck down, what are they called, you know, when you have like a, you know, like a button type, a covered button, and it pulls the eider down into a puffed up shape, and there's a regular number of them. So that was what I was trying to draw there, as an eider down.
Right. I've been told that we ought to be drawing to a close in a moment. Julia, had you familiarized yourself with the dream before the session started? Yes, I did,
because we were working on the little film. So I'd heard Brigitte read the dream several times, but I hadn't looked at the book. And I did feel very worried about this evening, because we always do it like that. It's kind of like busking almost, you know, you don't know what you're going to get. None of us know what we're going to get. And so I hadn't looked at the book to see which page I would use, as I'm, you know, but I hadn't really got a picture. And I kept saying to Mark, I'm not getting a picture in my head, because normally I hear the dream and I get a picture and I'm off, you know, but I didn't have that with this. I found it much more difficult, because she, I feel quite sorry for her in a way, because she's so paired up with Freud in a way, and we're, you know, I'm painting her dream onto Freud's book again, and so it's like she's forever entwined with him throughout history. You know, there's this kind of, there's a relational pairing, I suppose, in terms of their histories together. And I think in my mind I felt quite, I built it up quite a lot in my mind, I think.
Just so everybody knows, normally, and the ones you'll see on the website, Julia paints them, she only hears them when they're told to her at the session, and so the dream is then heard, the pages are found, and she does it all. But like she said, we did see Brigitte's wonderful film from Vienna, so she therefore had heard the film, but she hadn't had heard the dream, but she hadn't worked out what pages to use. And it is a bit spooky that it's got the number 17, because
well, that's
Dora
just one of the
started
points.
her
17, but up here,
analysis
17.
at age 17.
Well, obviously, if you've got this is how I use this book, because it has footnotes in it and different shapes and things in the text. So the 17 refers to 17 below. And it's interesting that, I don't know what amenorrhea is, actually. You know what amenorrhea is?
Not having periods.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know what that was. But it's just like hysterical symptoms, profound depression, chief troubles of this patient. I just thought that was really interesting. I guess he did this endlessly with different women, and found these problems. But you know, it's funny that I chose that kind of text, I suppose.
Deirdre said the perspective of the steps is very Escher-like. They could be going down or up. What would this dream mean to you if it was yours, Julia?
Me?
Asks one person.
Oh, well, I had this whole theory in my mind that that the jewel case is that Dora is feeling it's that kind of you're coming to an age where you're taking on a woman's role almost. You know, you're no longer a child. You're in this sort of, you know, in between space. And yeah, I felt that the I can't articulate it. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm aware of time.
And, no. Articulation. I think what Julia's saying is something she said to me earlier when I said, well, maybe Dora is blaming her mother and that's why it's the mother's jewel case. And what Julia had said to me earlier on, which I think she might be articulating now, is that the dream for Julia is about Dora or saying, this is your role. Was that what you were saying? This is your jewel case. You know, it's I'm not at that stage. I didn't know. I may be reading that into you.
I'm very tired. I'm really sorry. And the thing is, once you've drawn for 2 hours, the words don't come out very well. So I can't articulate it. And I'm aware that we haven't got a lot of time.
Oh, so. We're quarter past. So I'm actually supposed to be finishing.
Yeah.
So unless thank you all for a terrific discussion and painting. Thank you, Ash. I am going to have to draw it to a close. I would love to thank all of the panelists. I'd like to thank Katharina for having been with us. And I'd like to thank the other panelists, Danny and Brigitte and Deirdre and Zora for reading.
Yeah, and, wonderful readings.
So no, those were
it's just been such a joy to do this tonight. I think it's just well, it's tonight for us, but and just to have to give a discussion of Dora's dream. Yeah, just to use.
And thank you, Mark and Julia, for organizing all of this.
Thank you. I'm so glad so many people joined in, and I'm so glad we got the panelists we got, and that we also got Katharina, and that we got the Dreams and Associations read. They were that was fantastic. So
really
thank
magical.
You.
Thank you for organizing.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
As I said, Mark, it's been an honor.
Thank you. It was great to have you here, and you were one of the inspirations for having it because of the event you had at the Freud Gallery, which Freud Museum in London. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you, Julia. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all. We're going to put it on the internet soon. We'll put it on our dreamsid.com website. We go in and make a high definition scan. And thank you all very much for being at this event on this 120th anniversary. So thank you from me. Goodbye. And goodbye from Julia. And goodbye from everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.